"Oh, wow. This is your entire apartment." She laughed right in my face. Then she took out her phone, snapped a photo without asking, and posted it with the caption IKEA meets Shoebox. I didn't say a word, but that night I stared at my cracked ceiling and made a promise to myself one day. This block would belong to me. 6 years later, I stood at the closing table, signed the last paper, and handed her the eviction notice. I didn't just move out, I bought the whole damn block. My name is Natalie Brooks, and for 5 years, I lived in a studio apartment that was barely the size of a parking space. It was Unit 3A, 1525 Valencia Street, San Francisco. 240 square feet of cracked paint, creaky floorboards, and a bathroom so tiny I had to turn sideways to shut the door. But it was mine, my little world, my quiet place after 12-hour shifts at the indie bookstore 2 blocks down. I couldn't afford much, but I had coffee, second-hand books, and peace. And for the most part, I was okay. Until she walked in. Her name was Brielle Kane, fashion blogger, part-time model, and the kind of woman who somehow made every room feel smaller when she entered. She just started at the store part-time, some grounding experience. She said her manager recommended to help her write more authentic content, whatever that meant. The first week, she was polite, friendly even. She complimented my work ethic, my quirky hair clips, even borrowed a book from my collection. So when she asked one day if I could watch her cat while she went on a photo shoot, I said yes. I should have known better. She followed me home after our shift, and the second I opened my door, she froze. I smiled, a little embarrassed. "Sorry, it's not much, but it's cozy." That's when she said it. "Oh, wow. This is your entire apartment." She let out a laugh, not a light giggle, not amused. It was sharp, mocking, like I was some kind of joke. Then came the phone. She didn't ask, just raised her hand, took a picture, and typed furiously. 10 minutes later, I saw it. On her Instagram story, for all 35,000 of her followers to see. A wide shot of my studio, every inch of it. Captioned IKEA meets Shoebox complete with a crying laugh emoji and a tag studio fail. I didn't say anything. Not to her. Not even when she looked at me like she expected me to laugh along. I just handed her the cat food, closed the door, and sat on my tiny floor mattress in silence. But that silence wasn't empty. It was fire. I stared at the cracked ceiling above me that night, listened to the hum of someone's TV from downstairs, and I made myself a promise. Someday, this block would belong to me. It sounded ridiculous. I didn't have savings, didn't come from money, didn't know a thing about real estate, but I had something else. That humiliation. It lit something in me. Something Brielle would never understand. I started researching, reading books on investing, watching YouTube videos in the middle of the night. I asked questions at the local library, went to free seminars after work, bit by bit. I started learning how people build wealth in this city, not with flashy jobs, not with likes or followers, but with dirt, property, title deeds. And then came the unexpected opportunity. Mr. Manuel Rojas, an elderly man who lived in the duplex next door. He ran a tiny corner bodega for 30 years before retiring. We talked. Sometimes he'd see me carrying groceries up my stairs and offer mangoes or homemade tamales. One day, out of nowhere, he knocked on my door. He said his son wanted to sell the property, but he didn't trust the big firms. He wanted someone who knew the neighborhood, someone who would keep it human. "I see how you live," he told me. "You respect space. That matters." I scraped together every dollar I had, took out a modest loan, and by some miracle, I bought my first property, 1527 Valencia. 2 units, 1 tenant, old plumbing, broken shutters. But it was mine. I didn't tell anyone, especially not Brielle. She was too busy posting photo shoots from penthouse rooftops. But me, I had a key and a plan. And I was just getting started. But it wasn't just about the apartment. It was about everything that came with it. The way people looked at you when you said studio, like your life was in parentheses, like your dreams had a square footage cap. I remember every night I spent lying on that futon. The water stain above my bed looked like a seahorse if I tilted my head just right. I used to name the creaks in the wall. Harold, Susan, Creaky George. I found peace in that tiny box, until she turned it into a joke. And what hurt the most wasn't the laughter. It was the way she didn't see me at all, like I was just a funny side character in her curated life. Her boutique coffee, her curated filters, her fake authenticity. But I kept going. In the morning, I'd sweep the bookstore floor with my headphones in, listening to podcasts on real estate deals. At night, I'd take notes, highlight terms I didn't understand, memorize local zoning laws like they were lyrics to a revenge anthem. I started helping Mr. Rojas more, fixing things, helping him carry groceries, sitting with him when he got dizzy. It wasn't a strategy, it was just human. But he noticed. I remember the day he gave me the keys. His hand trembled a little. "This place has soul," he said. "Take care of it like it's your own skin." And I did. I cleaned every tile with a toothbrush, learned how to patch drywall from YouTube, rented out the bottom unit to a single mom named Elsie and her daughter Jasmine, who painted flowers on the mailbox. I wasn't flipping homes. I was building something, quietly, brick by brick. And Brielle. She never noticed, because people like her never look down, only up, only toward the next spotlight, the next viral caption. But I was okay being invisible, because invisibility is power when no one sees you coming. And I was coming. For the street. For the silence she laughed at. For every shoebox girl that got mocked and ignored. I wasn't just going to rise. I was going to own the ground they walked on. They say silence is weakness. But for me, silence was the strategy. While she posted rooftop selfies and cappuccinos with rose foam, I was in the back of the library, flipping through books older than her captions. Every Friday night, I walked past bars filled with laughter, holding printouts of zoning codes and rental market trends. While Brielle got hundreds of likes for an outfit post, I celebrated finding a property with original plumbing and an absentee landlord, one like at a time, one document at a time. There's something addictive about being underestimated. No one sees you coming. No one thinks the girl with the squeaky sneakers and thrifted jeans is studying cash-on-cash return models at 2A. But I was... And the fire from that night, the humiliation in her laugh kept my hands moving even when my eyes begged for sleep. The duplex I bought from Mr. Rojas gave me a taste. The first check from my tenant, Elsie, wasn't just money. It was proof. Proof that I could build something bigger than myself. I reinvested every dollar, didn't buy new clothes, didn't upgrade my mattress, didn't even get takeout. I lived off canned beans and instant noodles so I could scrape together down payments. I called it the Shoebox Revenge Fund. Every deposit, every small win, was a brick in the future I was quietly constructing. In year 2, I found a rundown triplex at the edge of the Mission District. It had chipped siding, a rotting porch, and enough red flags to scare off any casual buyer. But not me. I saw potential in every crack, negotiated hard, secured a fixer-upper loan, and spent the next 9 months living in one of the units while gut renovating the others with my bare hands and a friend's old toolkit. Every blister was a step closer. Every scraped knuckle meant fewer people like Brielle could laugh at girls like me. I became obsessed with maps, city planning meetings, historic property sales, absentee ownership reports. I tracked buildings like she tracked fashion trends, while Brielle posted about manifesting luxury. I was manifesting spreadsheets, bricks, and passive income. One morning, I saw it. A for sale sign in front of 1531 Valencia, the old corner building with the green awning. It used to be a florist's shop. Now boarded up. I remembered buying flowers there when I first moved to the city. It felt poetic. I called the broker that afternoon. It was expensive, more than I'd ever paid. But I had equity now. I leveraged it, pulled every string, took out a commercial mortgage, even borrowed from a small community fund for women investors. And I got it. 3 floors, 6 units, 2 retail spaces, mine. That's when I saw her again. Brielle, standing in front of a building just a block down, opening a boutique she called Kane & Co. All neutrals, velvet chairs, gold-trimmed hangers, her brand in physical form. I watched her through the window from across the street, still smiling like she owned the world. She didn't recognize me. Of course she didn't. To her, I was still the shoebox girl, forgettable, background, exactly how I needed to be. By year 4, I owned 5 buildings on the same street. I created a shell company to consolidate ownership, Shoebox Holdings, LLC, named in honor of her caption. The irony made me smile every time I signed something. I started getting calls from landlords looking to sell. My reputation was quiet but solid. People said I paid on time, took care of the buildings, didn't play games. And more than anything, I respected the neighborhood. That meant something to the old-timers, the abuelitas, the musicians, the single dads with side hustles. They remembered how I started. They rooted for me. I kept my head down. Because the goal wasn't clout, it was ownership. Real ownership. The kind that makes people like Brielle need permission to exist in a space. And then came the opportunity I didn't expect. The building her boutique was in 1537. Valencia was going up for sale. The property owner had passed. His kids were out of state, had no interest in keeping it. They wanted to offload fast. I made an offer the next day, all cash, no inspection delays, no contingencies. They accepted within 48 hours. I stood in front of the mirror that night and just laughed. Not the cruel kind she used, but the kind that says, look how far you've come. I didn't go to her boutique the next day. I waited for the ink to dry, waited for the ownership transfer, and when the paperwork was official, I walked into Kane & Co. like a quiet storm. She looked up from her laptop. Can I help you? She asked. Her voice was polite, tired, like retail had worn the shine off. I pulled out an envelope and slid it across the counter. She opened it, read the page, and froze. This is an eviction notice. I nodded. The building has a new owner. She looked at me, eyes wide. It was like watching a mirror shatter in slow motion. Wait. You bought this building, I smiled. Just slightly, no. I bought the block. She stood there in silence, mouth open, words caught between her lips. And for once, she couldn't post it. There was no caption clever enough to twist this ending, no filter to soften the blow of being removed by the girl she once laughed at. I didn't gloat. I didn't say I told you so. I just watched her process it, the way her eyebrows furrowed, the way she clutched her designer sweater like it could protect her. There must be a mistake, she whispered. But there wasn't. The document had my name, my LLC, my terms. She had 60 days to vacate. She looked up at me again. This time, she really saw me. Not the shoebox girl, not the book clerk, but the woman who now controlled her lease. And I saw it. The flicker in her eyes. Recognition, mixed with regret. Maybe even fear. But mostly surprise. Because in her world, girls like me weren't supposed to win. We were cautionary tales, underdogs without a comeback. Well, not this time. She opened her mouth, maybe to argue, maybe to cry, but I turned and walked away before she could speak, because the victory wasn't in her reaction. It was in the silence, in the echo of footsteps on a block I now owned. I passed the buildings one by one. The florist shop I revived into a co-op. The triplex I renovated with my hands. The old bakery now run by a refugee family I leased to at half-market rent. This wasn't just real estate. It was legacy. Built not from pity, but from precision. And from that day forward, when people asked what I did for a living, I didn't say landlord. I didn't say investor. I said, simply, I build blocks out of disrespect. And every brick was mortared with silence, with revenge you can't post, with dignity they never see coming. This wasn't about proving her wrong anymore. It was about proving myself right, that I was never small, never just a girl in a studio apartment. I was a force, and now I had the deed to prove it. They say once you get your first win, everything else gets easier. But they don't tell you about the weight, the pressure of becoming someone you promised your old self you'd be. When I bought the building with Brielle's boutique, I thought that was the summit. But it wasn't. It was just the next base camp. Ownership didn't make me feel safe. It made me feel responsible, not just for the buildings, but for the people in them. Tenants who trusted me, mothers raising kids, artists painting murals in the alleyways, elders who still called the block by names long erased from city maps. I started waking up at 5 a.m., walking the sidewalks before the city stirred, picking up litter, checking gutters, saying good morning to shop owners setting up for the day. And slowly, they stopped seeing me as the girl who bought the block. They started seeing me as part of it. I opened a community fund, called it the Jasmine Trust, after the little girl who painted daisies on the mailbox of my first duplex. We used it to help elderly tenants with repairs, cover gaps in rent for single parents, fund poetry nights in the old bakery basement. The street was no longer just a source of income. It was a living thing. And I was its quiet steward. But growth comes with enemies, especially when you're young, especially when you're a woman, especially when you don't dress like power and don't speak like you need to prove anything. Developers started circling, people in tailored suits with zero history here. They offered money to buy me out, big money, enough to live comfortable for a lifetime. But I wasn't building comfort. I was building presence, permanent presence. One of them, Stephen Lane, invited me to lunch. Rooftop view, white tablecloth, that fake smile that doesn't reach the eyes. He said, "You're impressive, but you're sitting on gold. Sell now, while it's hot." I smiled back and replied, "Gold means nothing if it costs you your roots." He didn't get it, and he never would. In my 3rd year of ownership, I faced my first real challenge. The city planned a new development that would raise property taxes across the district. Some of my tenants' longtime residents were at risk. I couldn't let that happen. So I spent 2 months attending every zoning board meeting. I read public policy like it was scripture. I learned how to file exemptions, how to appeal on behalf of legacy tenants, how to fight without shouting. And we won. The block was designated as a heritage zone, our taxes capped, our spaces protected, and for the first time in my life, I cried in front of strangers, not because I lost something, but because I finally knew I was exactly where I was meant to be. I remember walking back home that night, the air warm, the smell of cinnamon from the corner bakery drifting into the street. An old man played guitar on the stoop like it was 1963 again, and I looked at my old studio window, the cracked glass still there, but now, reflecting streetlight off buildings that bore my name. Some nights, I'd still sleep on the floor, not because I had to, but because I wanted to remember. Remember the girl no one believed in, the girl they laughed at, who they underestimated, and how that girl bought back her dignity one deed at a time. Around that time, I hired my first full-time staff, a property manager named Devin, quiet, detail-obsessed, a former Marine who once ran logistics for shelters. He called me boss with a smirk, but he respected the mission. Together, we mapped out expansion carefully, not for growth's sake, but for sustainability. We identified 4 more key properties that had community value. Old repair shops, a laundromat, a cafe once owned by a jazz pianist. One by one, we brought them in, renovated with intention, not for aesthetics, but for access. Ramps where there were stairs, reading corners where there were back rooms. I wasn't a mogul. I was a memory keeper. And people started to notice, not on social media, but in real life. At city meetings, they nodded when I spoke. Mothers left notes of thanks in rent envelopes. Even teenagers tagged me on walls with graffiti that said, "She owns it, but she don't act like it." That was the best compliment I ever got. One evening, I walked past Kane & Co., empty, boarded windows, a for lease sign gathering dust. She never reopened. Some say she left the city. Others say she went online only. But me, I didn't need to know, because her story had ended the moment she forgot to look beyond the frame. And mine was still being written in bricks, in deeds, in every life this block touched. That's the thing about revenge. It doesn't always look like fire. Sometimes it looks like foundation. And when it's strong enough, they can't tear it down. Not with words, not with laughs, not even with money, because you built it from the ground up, and it remembers you. Weeks later, I received a letter, handwritten, no return address. Inside was a photo. It was of me and Brielle from back in the bookstore. We were laughing about something. I don't even remember what. On the back of the photo, just one sentence: "I should have seen you coming." There was no name, but I didn't need one. I folded the photo, placed it inside a frame, and tucked it behind my office bookshelf. A quiet reminder that even the people who try to humiliate you are watching, and sometimes even they learn something. In my 4th year, I hosted my first tenant town hall. We set up folding chairs in the old florist's lobby. I brought cookies, homemade lemonade, and 0 PowerPoint slides. Just stories, just ears, and heart. We talked about what this block needed: a drop-off childcare point, more trees, a corner bench for elders to sit. None of it was glamorous, but all of it was necessary. And we made it happen, together. Because real ownership isn't what your name is on, it's what you invest your soul into. There were days I missed the quiet of that studio, the way I could hear the rain hit my windows and feel like the whole world had paused. Now, I had meetings, decisions, headlines. I even ended up in a local paper, "The Girl Who Bought the Block." The headline made me smile. Not because it was dramatic, but because I knew that girl. I had been her. And every time someone called me that, they reminded me I wasn't finished. Not even close. I started mentoring other women, young girls with big dreams and small wallets. We met in the back of the old bakery on Thursdays, called it the Shoebox Circle. We didn't just talk about real estate. We talked about how to survive the mockery, how to stay quiet without being silent, how to outgrow the shame they try to bury you in, and maybe, just maybe, how to buy the ground they once laughed on. By year 5, the block wasn't just mine. It was thriving, not because of trendy cafes or luxury makeovers, but because people felt seen, respected, protected. And in that same breath, my name started floating around City Hall. Natalie Brooks, the quiet girl who flipped the narrative, the one who didn't bulldoze her way through change, but planted it, carefully, intentionally. I got offers, so many offers. People wanted me to consult, speak, sell, partner, expand, but I turned down 90% of them because I wasn't building an empire, I was cultivating soil, and you don't rush a harvest. Still, one proposal caught my attention. A nonprofit developer approached me with a vision. Convert an abandoned lot 6 blocks down into transitional housing for women leaving domestic violence shelters. They needed land, a partner who understood, and a face the city would listen to. I said yes without hesitation, not because I needed the recognition, but because I knew what it felt like to be invisible, to be told, "This is all you'll ever have," and to still whisper, "Just watch me." We called it the Bloom Project. 12 units, a shared garden, free childcare, each wall painted by survivors, each room holding stories that couldn't be erased. The day it opened, I didn't cut a ribbon. I handed the scissors to one of the residents, a young mother named Tasha, with a daughter who liked to pretend my sidewalk was a stage. She whispered, "No one's ever let me start anything before." And I replied, "Then start something big. That moment meant more than every deed I ever signed. But not everyone cheered. Change, even gentle change, breeds resistance. Some longtime owners didn't like what I was doing. They said I was waking up the block too fast, that I was attracting attention to a neighborhood they preferred to keep quiet. I got anonymous letters, nasty voicemails. Even a local radio host mocked me on air. But I didn't flinch, because I remembered something Mr. Rojas once told me. If they're throwing stones, you've already built something worth guarding. Still, it wore me down, the whispers, the way my face started showing up in articles with comments that read, "Just another gentrifier in disguise." I hated that word, because I knew what it really meant. Erasure, of culture, of people, of memory, and I fought like hell to be the opposite of that. But sometimes, perception outpaces reality. So I invited everyone to a night market, local vendors, live music, storytelling under the stars, no speeches, just faces, just food and dance and reclaimed joy. I walked from booth to booth, shook hands, listened to feedback, absorbed every doubt, every question, every praise and pushback. And by the end of the night, I stood on a milk crate and said just one thing. This block doesn't belong to me. It belongs to us. I just signed the papers. You make it real. A round of applause broke out, not loud, not wild, but steady, like rain falling on roots. The kind of sound you build futures with. That week, something changed. The resistance didn't vanish, but it softened. A bakery that once gave me side eyes started offering me pan dulce on Thursdays. A hardware shop owner who used to call me Miss Thing now called me Miss Brooks. It was never about power, it was about presence. And presence, earned the right way, echoes louder than any microphone. Still, I stayed careful, intentional, kept my books tight, my hands dirty, my vision clear, and slowly, we mapped out the next phase: equity-based tenant partnerships. If you lived in one of my buildings long enough, paid on time, showed community involvement, you could earn partial ownership, shares, real stakes. People called me crazy, said I was giving away the farm, but I wasn't giving anything away. I was building something no one could steal, a block that defended itself. Brielle texted me once. I hadn't heard from her in years. Just 3 words, "You were right." I didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. Besides, this story was never about her. She was the spark, but I was the flame, and I'd long since stopped chasing shadows. That year, a little boy named Elijah drew a picture of me at the community fair. He gave it to me with a sticky blue hand and said, "You look like a superhero, but in jeans." I hung it in my office, right next to the original photo of my studio. And every time I feel tired, every time I wonder if I'm doing enough, I look at those 2 images side by side and remember, power isn't in how high you rise, it's in how wide you reach. And this block, it reaches further every day. The next morning, I stood at the corner of 1525 Valencia Street, right in front of the building that used to hold my studio apartment. Someone else lived there now, a student, young, hopeful. I had left a note in the mailbox the day she moved in. "Don't let the size fool you. Magic starts small." I never signed it. She wouldn't know it was from me, but that didn't matter, because the point was never to be remembered. It was to help someone else begin. Later that week, I met with the city council about a new initiative. They wanted my insight on how to replicate the model of equitable development in other neighborhoods. I told them, you can't copy the formula. You have to know the people. You have to care beyond the numbers. They nodded like they understood, but I could tell most of them didn't. Still, one woman stayed behind after the meeting. She introduced herself as Lena, a first-generation planner from Oakland. She said, "You made me believe I don't have to become cold to make change," and that was the best win of the month. I didn't start this to be a symbol. I started this because I was laughed at, belittled, dismissed, and I refused to let that be the final chapter. Now I help write new chapters for others. Not with charity, but with infrastructure, with rooted ownership, with shared power. Some nights, I still hear echoes of Brielle's laugh, not because I'm haunted, but because that sound sharpened me. It carved the outline of the woman I became, and in some strange, poetic way, I'm grateful. She mocked my shoebox, but that shoebox became a cornerstone, and now we're laying foundations from it. Every corner, every voice, every life on this block has a place, not because I gave it to them, but because we claimed it together. This isn't a story of revenge anymore. It's a story of becoming, and becoming doesn't end. It only expands. They say legacy is what you leave behind, but I think it's more than that. Legacy is what you plant in others. In the cracks of concrete they said nothing would grow from. In the silence you chose, when you could have shouted. It's the echo of your presence, long after you've stepped away. 6 years after that laugh in my studio apartment, I stood in front of the old city courthouse, not because I was being sued, but because they were naming a public space after me, the Natalie Brooks Community Square. I didn't want a plaque, but they insisted, so I agreed. On one condition, that they also build a public lending library in the center, free books, open shelves, and no checkouts. Just trust. I watched as kids ran through the garden paths. A girl with pigtails sat cross-legged, reading a graphic novel under a mural of the old bakery. Someone had painted me on the wall. I didn't ask for it, but there I was, jeans, curly bun, clipboard in hand. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest. Beneath it, someone had scrawled in chalk built with bricks no one saw coming. I stood still for a long time. Let it wash over me, because that wasn't just about me. That was about every woman who'd been mocked, every girl who was told, "This is all you'll ever be," and proved them wrong, silently. That night, I walked home through streets I knew better than any map, past murals I'd funded, street lamps I'd replaced, windows I'd seen repaired with care, but I didn't feel like I owned it. I felt like I belonged to it, and that was a deeper kind of power. Back in my office, I sat at my desk, the same desk I bought secondhand from a thrift shop when I was still counting every cent. The shoebox photo still framed. Next to it, Elijah's superhero sketch, and a note from Jasmine that simply read, "Thank you for not leaving." I closed my eyes, breathed, and felt the full weight of everything I had built. Not heavy, but full, like rain in soil that knows what to do next. That weekend, I hosted a workshop for first-time buyers. We filled every seat, a mix of young mothers, students, retirees, even a few teenage boys who came out of curiosity. I opened the session with a single line. They laughed at my studio apartment, so I bought the whole block. Let's talk about how. The room fell silent, not from shock, but from respect. Because in that line, they saw possibility, not fantasy. Proof. I spent 3 hours answering questions, demystifying language, encouraging mindset, not just about money, but about patience, strategy, staying steady when the world tries to belittle you. Afterward, a girl named Nyla came up, said she worked 2 jobs, lived with her aunt, had dreams bigger than her paycheck. She asked, "Do you really think someone like me could do this?" I looked her straight in the eye and said, "You already are. The rest is just paperwork." That's what they don't tell you about revenge. The best kind isn't loud, it's consistent, it's compound interest on silence. It's every small decision you make when no one's watching, every time you bite your tongue and let your work speak instead. And eventually it speaks louder than they ever did. I walked Nyla to the door, wished her well, and as I turned back, I saw my reflection in the glass. Not the girl in the shoebox anymore, but the woman who turned that shoebox into a blueprint for every underdog, every dreamer who dares to build quietly and one day wakes up, owning everything they were once denied. A few months later, I was invited to speak at a national conference on urban renewal. I almost said no. Big stages never called to me, but Devin said something that stuck. Sometimes the ones who built it brick by brick have to teach the ones born in castles. So I went, stood on a stage in front of developers, city planners, financiers. They expected graphs, projections, buzzwords. Instead, I told them a story about a girl in a studio apartment, a laugh that burned like acid, and the fire that followed. I watched their eyes shift. Some leaned in, some looked away, but no one moved. Because truth, when spoken from the dirt up, doesn't ask for permission. It roots itself, and it grows. After the speech, a young architect chased me down the hall. She had tears in her eyes, said her professors mocked her for designing too emotionally, said I gave her back her why. I told her what I tell myself every morning. You don't have to build cold to build strong. Back home, things kept moving. We broke ground on a shared co-working space for small neighborhood businesses, launched a microloan program for immigrant vendors, even partnered with a tech nonprofit to teach coding to kids after school right in the basement of the building that once held Brielle's boutique. There's poetry in that, in taking the space where someone once laughed at you and turning it into a classroom where other voices rise. Sometimes I walk the halls late at night, lights dimmed, hearing the faint hum of computers, the quiet scratch of pencils, laughter spilling from brainstorming corners. And I think this is what justice sounds like. Not vengeance, but creation, a better future, brick by silent brick. I never saw Brielle again, and I'm okay with that, because my story was never meant to revolve around her. She was the match, but I built the fire. Years from now, no one will remember the Instagram post, the laugh, the caption, but they'll sit on the benches built under my buildings, read the free books, live in the units with light pouring in through windows I refuse to board up, and that will be enough. Because revenge, real revenge, isn't when they finally see your worth. It's when you no longer need them to. A few weeks later, a documentary team reached out. They wanted to tell my story. I hesitated, because this wasn't about spotlight. It was about soil. But then I met the director, a young woman who grew up 5 blocks from my first duplex. She said, "When I was 13, I walked past your building and saw a woman fixing a window by herself. That was the first time I thought, maybe I could own something too." So I said yes, not for me, but for the ones watching through windows, still waiting to be seen. They followed me for 2 months, captured moments I didn't know mattered. Me helping a boy fix his bike chain, bringing tamales to Mrs. Cruz, who just had hip surgery, sitting in silence beside Devin after we lost a tenant to cancer. They called the film The Block Built Back, and when it premiered at a local theater, they left 1 seat empty in the front row. Taped to it was a note for the girl in the shoebox. I cried quietly through the credits, not out of sadness, but because somehow every version of me from floor sleeper to founder was finally in the same room. As the lights came up, a woman next to me said, "You changed the city," and I shook my head. No, I said, "The city changed because it finally listened," and that was the greatest victory of all.